Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected and situated. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails 1136 New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Indira Allegra, Erika May Chua Holum, Kite, Jarod Liu, Namy, Jamel Robinson, Joey Tang, James Webb, Carmen Winant, and Joel H. Casid. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Artist Indira Allegra uses text and textile production, combined material they designate as a textile, to embody unseen forces like memory, haunting, grief, and emotions born from trauma. Erika May Chua Holum is a Cynthia Woods Mitchell Associate Curator at the Blaffer Art Museum at the University of Houston. Kite, also known as Suzanne Kite, is an Oglala Lakota performance artist, visual artist, and composer raised in Southern California. Jarod Liu is an artist who draws on photography to explore intergenerational encounters with diasporic loss, displacement, and post-memory. Artist and musician Namy's practice encompasses sound, its history, and its impact on the built environment. Jamel Robinson is a multidisciplinary artist working in painting, assemblage, sculpture, installation, poetry, and performance. Joey Tang is a Hong Kong-born artist, writer, curator, and director at Casid, San Francisco, who experiments with the formats of versions, repetitions, and iterations as an ongoing engagement with time and its potential. James Webb is a conceptual artist known for his site-specific interventions and installations. Carmen Winant is a found image artist whose photographic practice takes the form of collages, sculptures, artist books, billboards, and wall installations, and expands the public dialogue of the representation of women in Western society. And our host for today is artist, theorist, and historian Joel H. Casid. They hold the appointment of Professor of Visual Studies in the Department of Art History and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're lucky to have Jill as a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I will pass it over to Indira, who will kick it off with the reading.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I'm going to share with you some words from Dispersal of a Feeling, Blood Notes on Choreography and Illness, and this is one of two books which I have out this fall through Sming Sming Books, and maybe I'll put the link in the chat if you feel so moved. And this is an intergenerational, this is as a result of an intergenerational conversation on illness and what we can learn about choreography through that. So I'm just going to start my time there. It's dedicated to my grandmother Warnell, who's passed, and Miss Dora Parker, and for anyone sick and disabled, finding gestures and phrases on a moving planet. And Brooklyn Rail, your audience is the first to hear from it. So it's kind of a mini book lunch in a way, I guess. As Bloodway, we say space is dense with mouths splitting our membranes to taste for salt. I'll start again. As Bloodway, we say space is dense with mouths splitting our membranes to taste for salt. Passing between our throats is a salienated sound which rolls, cresting vessels to quake tissues nearby. I had a piece of toast and I had a sausage patty. It was too hot, so I didn't eat it. So I ate the piece of toast. For some reason, my mind doesn't want to hold it. Yes, it is true that tumors are timekeepers, but timekeepers cannot make dances. Dance is a language which centers the desire of space to taste movement. Space is a substrate of shifting pathways, which at some moments swell open for movement to pass through, and in other moments squeeze shut, pushing dances along. And all the negative space, or like the negative memory, may not have a memory that is defined by the memory around it. I'm gonna have to jump 6 times to make a shadow. In our bloodway, repetition creates density. Presence of density creates meaning. Absence of density creates meaning. I'm going to skip ahead and leave you with a final meditation here. Movement does not originate with dancers or choreographers. Movement originates in the cosmos, spinning, falling, traveling at a speed are sequences which arise in the cosmos. Choreography is the result of the location of dancers within the fabric of the cosmos. Wherever the cosmos is rolling, dances will have a rolling quality also. Wherever the cosmos is contracting, dancers will have a contracting quality also. Our task as choreographers is to reassure bodies who are being danced of this phenomenon. Thank you.
Oh, that was such a gorgeous way to start us off. That sense of choreography is reassuring us how we can dance with what's dancing us. And that phrase of quaking tissues nearby, a lot's quaking us too. And I felt very held and supported by your words, Indira. Thank you. I wanted to start us off as well with a personal acknowledgement. I am the queer descendant of Jewish refugees from Germany and what's now Belarus and Ukraine. My great-grandmother, after whom I was named, was taken on the first transport of Jews out of the Baden region to the Gors concentration camp in southern France on the border between France and Spain. As the descendant of dispossessed Jews, many of whom didn't survive, I refused the weaponization of my grief and losses and the tactical weaponization of Holocaust memory in the enforcement of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition that equates a critique of the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. That's now become a real weapon of counterinsurgency. And the tactical weaponization of memory as fuel for the Israeli state's genocidal war machine funded by the US. I condemn the assaults on artistic, academic, and journalistic freedom and the double standards with regard to boycotts and calls for divestment and sanctions. And in their names and my own, I'm with Palestine still in not just calling for ceasefire, but also naming to dismantle the genocidal apartheid regime of our time and doing so as a praxis of love. I also recognize that I'm joining you all from the unceded territory of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I want to thank my friend Chi Ming Yong for the acknowledgement that Zoom isn't outside settler colonial occupation, The Zoom corporate technology that brings us together virtually is headquartered in San Jose, California, on unceded Muwekma land. So let's remember that virtual space also has a material basis and participates in the ongoing legacies of land theft. Without material consideration of land back, the right of return, reparations, and abolition of the carceral state and colonial occupation, acknowledgement is, of course, never enough. Let's then not just acknowledge, but also hold open the possible portal that holding this conversation presents as a chance to send the reverberations of a never again for anyone, and a transversal no to US imperial funding of the Israeli state war machine, no to the carceral state, no to selective solidarity, and no to white supremacy and Euro-exceptionalism as the channel for a binding bond among the uncounted in the condition of a worldlessness that in my own work I've been calling the necrocene, to bring close a reckoning with the catastrophe that's already occurred, and yet within this worldlessness, a palpable sense that there are still ways of doing things with being undone, to insist on the supports for livable life, for Palestinian, Black, Brown, Indigenous, queer, trans, and refugee life. So perhaps with that personal acknowledgement as a way of holding space, I was hoping we could start the slideshow. Magli. Detroit activist Grace Lee Boggs would often begin by asking, what time is it on the clock of the world? And she would ask that question to withdraw our compelled attention from the factory punch clock of global racial capitalism, to attune us to another timekeeping rhythm, to the rhythms of our earth and the anachronic time of revolution. In response, we might say that it's more than time for makeshift memorials, small revolutions. The two-part exhibition between Cadiz, San Francisco, and the Blaffer Art Museum in Houston, co-curated in San Francisco by Lindsay Albert, Joseph Del Pesco, and Joey Tang, and co-curated with Blaffer by Erika, May, Chua, Holum, and Lindsay Albert and Joey Tang. We're gathered on the occasion of this two-part exhibition, whose urgency and timeliness might be said to lie in its anachronic refusal of hegemonic or official time, and its chrono-choreography, its choreography of time, of other ways to be with each other and creative practices of solidarity, interdependent vulnerability, and transversal support. It's really buoying to be in conversation with creative forces, Indira Allegra, Erika, May, Chua, Holum, Kite, Jarod, Namy, Jamel Robinson, Joey Tang, James Webb, and Carmen Winant, in this joint refusal to just move into what we're told somehow has to be the new normal. An exercise of its own form of, as the exhibition puts it, protest against forgetting. We're holding space here for the kinds of sharing out, frank talk, exchange against our isolation and abandonment, and embrace of our entanglement that we might also call, honoring one of the key processes of the exhibition, mutual aid. A key aspect of the exhibition extends to its public programs that, under the title Open Bodies, is conceived as extending the collective body of the exhibitions by acting as its sensory, kinesthetic, and perceptual extenders. And I was really taken with the description of the program as the exhibition's ears, limbs, even tongue. It's in a way, organs not just within, but also without, and as a way to honor by extension the ways that so many of us were tasked with, as the exhibition puts it, envisioning new forms of engagement to welcome new publics to their online and hybrid programs. Now, the Brooklyn Braille's new social environment that is hosting us today may have also begun out of precisely such necessity, yet it continues to offer a space that I know I really treasure in its holding space for the kinds of free expression and discourse that are being closed down elsewhere and newly closed down with the passage just today of the possibility of shutting down nonprofits that take positions that the US frames as terrorist in their expressions of solidarity with Palestine and critique of the state of Israel. So this space becomes even more precious. So I want to turn now to hear from the curators, artists as well present with us, starting with Joey Tang, who it's been such a treasure to be in long conversation with, and I'm so ecstatic to be with today.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Chloe, the Brooklyn Rail, and Magley for your support, inviting us for this convening today. And continuing a long-standing rapport, a really portal with Jill Casid. Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. I did think it was so fitting for us to gather here today since the new social environment was a direct response to the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, that amidst the precarity of being together, provided a space for us to gather virtually across time zones, sometimes in isolation, and that had become such a daily ritual for so many. So the Makeshift Memorial Small Revolutions two-part exhibition in both cities open a week apart in October and will conclude 3 weeks apart in February and March 2025. A bit of a backstory: shortly after I began working at Casid in late 2021, my colleague Joseph Del Pesco asked if I would like to collaborate and steer an exhibition project on the year 2020. My initial reaction was too soon. It was one of trepidation with a sense of impending PTSD for years to come. Like many, I entered into the pandemic without employment, moved back home, and took a new job. I found myself contending with the vexed situation in the world and of being once again inside an institution. With the curatorial team, my colleagues Lindsay Albert, Joseph, and the Blaffers, Erika, most of us in our new jobs, we began with the intention of examining how the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic continues to shape artistic practices. We looked beyond 2020 in light of rising global authoritarianism, climate crisis, and other social political surges. Many topics that came to the fore that spurred worldwide social movements, the toppling of colonial monuments, George Floyd murder that galvanized Black Lives Matter, the disproportionate and failing infrastructure across communities and countries that COVID revealed, had been known and lived with by the global majority. And artists, as prognosticators of cultural shifts, had always approached these subjects from their perspectives and positionalities of knowledge. So the exhibition was put together under a set of methodology, and I'll talk about San Francisco as well more specifically. And there are time, concurrence, intertwinement, and proximity. So the exhibition takes the pandemic as a node that moves both forward in time into the present and backwards in time towards the past. And the pandemic provided a kind of chiastic structure of understanding the world, not really a before and after, but always in variant. And with concurrence, we knew that the two exhibitions would need to take place at the same time, both opening before and running through the US presidential election cycle and beyond the inauguration. And this inability of not being able to occupy two places at once physically, and the possibility of doing so mentally, felt important to evoke. With intertwinement, we are guided by Judith Butler's pandemic era book, What World Is This? A Pandemic Phenomenology, on the notion of intertwinement and interdependency as ethics. Butler drew on Sarah Ahmed's queer phenomenology of spatial orientations and Merleau-Ponty's notion of the intertwining to understand our pandemic times. And I want to quote Butler here, quote, "My doing is already bound up with yours, which means that my doing is not only mine. And although we are surely distinct, there's no easy escape from this relation of mutual implication. One reason for the interrelation is that we depend on and share the fields of the intangible, the visible, the breathable, and the edible and ingestible, as well as the requirement for shelter and assistance of various kinds, including healthcare and life-enabling infrastructure. Of course, dependency can be miserable. It can take form as exploitation, imprisonment, and legal dispossession. It can be the scene of domination or unwanted self-loss. In those cases, reciprocity vanishes, as do ideals of equality. So the task is less a simple affirmation of interdependency than a collective effort to forge the best form of interdependency, the one that most clearly embodies the ideals of radical equality, end quote. And with proximity in San Francisco, each gallery's anchor work draws out visual and conceptual connections interlaced with what's around and beyond, nearby in the same exhibition space and far away in Houston. The tight installation hang, let's say, makes spatial relations of proximities as an attempt to lay bare and begin with differences in order to kind of visualize intersectionality towards kind of unresolved cartography of global struggles and resilience, arriving at an installation form that I am now calling a huddle solidarity. With the public program, like Jill said, we were thinking about extending into the city as a kind of body, tending to sound listening. I think we can go to the next slide. And one more. Yes, this is at the lab, which is a important experimental sound organization in San Francisco, which serves as one of the offsite public programs. Here you have Michael Rockowitz' Behemoth 2, which is an inflatable sculpture that takes the shrouded form of the toppled monument of Ulysses S. Grant in San Francisco that was toppled in early 2020. And it deflates and inflates in a cycle of every 60 to 90 seconds. It's animated by Asha Shashadri's video portmanteau, which is a recording of a live-scored live stream performance she did in March 2021 for Experimental Sound Studio. It's the kind of sonic tour de force that feels both like a dirge and an elegy for the rematriation of looted objects. In the video, you're guided in a pandemic-era empty museum tour of the Frick collection, superimposed at times with Chris Marker and Alain Resnais's 1953 film, Status Also Die. And today, I'm so happy that we have some of the participating artists here, and we ask each of you to share the work in the exhibition, followed by a simple prompt of how your practice has shifted or transformed or not in the last 4 to 5 years in the wake of the pandemic. And I thought I would share mine as well, that I continue to learn from the ongoing HIV/AIDS epidemic and crisis with my non-institutional curatorial work with the founding members of the art collective Fierce Pussy, Joy Episala, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, and the late Nancy Brooks Brody, who engaged with the world in tandem with their ceaseless activism and artistic practices. The project that I began with them 10 years ago, which was a previous New Social Environment talk, thank you so much, continues to be my lifeline to traverse the parameters of institutions through time. With that, I will hand off to my wonderful co-curator, Erika Chua Holum, to share a bit about the Blaffer exhibition.
Sure. Thank you so much, Joey. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you all for placing us on this dance floor, for intertwining us here in the Zoom space together. As was mentioned before, I'm the associate curator at the Blaffer, based at the University of Houston, which is a state-funded institution in Texas, of which many of the kind of arms and legs and appendages of scarcity around cultural politics and all sorts of hands of the current and forthcoming government are felt. In the planning of this show, there was attacks on literal artwork on campus and so many questions about the future of artistic production in this context. So these are conversations that were brought up about what would it mean to show my work on this campus in this environment to this audience. And these are things that were not lost as we were thinking through, dreaming about, and bringing all of these works together. So as you see here, we have a number of drawings by Eduardo Navarro. These were made during 2020 in lockdown in the artist's home in Buenos Aires. They were made for an exhibition that the artist never attended in London. And these essentially kind of connect to a number of different drawings, ruminations, pandemic era ways of thinking and processing the world around us in kind of a spatial awareness and headspace and locations of our own body. If we want to move forward. Throughout the exhibition, we have a number of different works that really reflect on the role of mutual aid. This is something that we were really conscious about and wanting to really place in the context of our communities in Houston, bringing in artists together, really questioning not just 2020 as this kind of outstanding, unprecedented moment within time or kind of our ways of understanding our connection to one another, but really trying to trace lineages of artistic practice that just became more prominent and really having a more amplified awareness of our own entanglements and relations to one another, as Joey so eloquently mentioned. One of the ways this was also done for this show was through having not just the exhibition with Caddis and all the works brought together, but also through artists selected through the Texas Biennial Open Call. One of the ways that we approach the planning of the biennial is using what we already had. And as I mentioned, there was so much kind of consternation and questioning around the future of what it would mean to produce in this context and abilities to really amplify the kinds of structural, cultural, and social conditions and forces that really felt like self-censorship or pretty overt forms of oppression that are being faced by artists. And it was really a way of signaling the kinds of conditions that we're working under and placing it in context with so many other parts of the world. So we're really grateful that this exhibition was able to open up that kind of relationship and understanding between the artworks that we've presented through this exhibition, and it's kind of interweaving within the Texas Biennial itself, which is focused on Houston in this edition, as well as sites along the Gulf Coast. One of the ways we've done that is one of the galleries in the museum right now is a performance space for the biennial's artists, in which we're also showing a film program called Closed Worlds. You can also move ahead. We kind of in this question around the way that my practice has shifted, or just different ways that we've had to move differently within the last 4 years, I thought a lot about the plurality of grief, as well as really the multiplicity of ways of recovery and resilience. And so with a friend, a co-curator, Innocent Ekojibuja, we developed this idea of a closed world as a 4-part film program, or 4 chapters going through different ways of processing grief, remembrance and memory, resiliency, and also recovery. And the idea is that participants or viewers of this film program would go through each chapter together. And although each chapter doesn't necessarily, maybe throughout the subject matter, relate to grief in a very particular way, maybe it's the loss of a loved one, displacement, or even climate grief, but rather kind of grappling with these questions together and going through this more holistic process. What would it mean to build the community through this kind of participation and way of going through something in its totality? So I think that this precisely raises different forms of interdependency and intertwinement through a very localized context, like the communities that are being brought together in Houston. But then next week, we'll also be running it in Doha. It's currently ongoing in Austin. The same film program will be in Jogja and in Lima. And there's something about this connection between something that we've all experienced and then the kind of intricacies of perhaps these different appendages of what it means to process this very intimate experience, but how it can be brought forward together.
Oh,
all that.
thank you so much, Erika. We're going to transition here to hearing from a wonderful gathering of artists exhibiting in this two-part exhibition, starting with Indira Allegra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail. It's a deep question around the ways that tracking the changes from 2020 to 2024. But it was important for me to start with this poem because I do think that one of the things that was really affirming for me in 2020 was this new social contract that folks had to understanding that even if you can't see something, it can still affect your life. And I'm a person who believes in very powerfully in the movement of forces which are unseen and elemental and ancestral in my life. And all of a sudden, there was this knowingness within popular culture around like that actually being real, but within the space of illness. And in 2021, I published an article in Textile, Cloth, and Culture called Unspooling die Rangelwinde, writing with Gunther Stolzel on grief threads and grief portals. And in that article, I talk about how the space between the threads is never talked about as being an essential part of the anatomy of a textile. And that those spaces between the threads in the textile are actual portals of activity. They're not passive. And that we really have to stop thinking about empty space as being passive space. And what if we flipped it and we actually thought about empty space as driving our movements throughout the world? So fast forward to the work at the Blaffer, one of the things that was really powerful for me when I visited the Blaffer for the first time was to think of the staircase as being this kind of open throat for the museum. And that this passage was incredibly important, something which might normally be overlooked as just something you have to move through to get to point B. But for me, the staircase was a thing itself. And I started doing a lot of research on the history of staircases and how human beings have used them throughout time. And there's just this consistent impulse and instinct to use staircases to express spiritual ideas or ideas of transcending from the mundane into whatever it is that you worship or that you're trying to reach. And so I was interested in working with this idea here at the Blaffer. At the bottom of the stairs, you see a bunch of prayer wands. Can I see the next slide? Perfect. And at the top of the stairs is the prayer fountain. So folks are invited to select a wand at the bottom of the stairs and to imbue it with a hope or a wish. Not everyone jives the language of prayer, but something which is on your heart. And I believe that anything which is on your heart has mass. Prayer has mass. Hope has mass. And how do we engage in this act of having our prayers be witnessed in public by other folks, which I think is really important. So as people move up the stairs, the space itself acknowledges their presence through sound. So you can't see through the images is that the stairs are instrumentalized. So there's a whole composition which gets played out as a person walks up the stairs and places their wand into the fountain, essentially weaving the hope of their heart into these waters. Water for me is a really important body of memory. I think that water remembers everything, and it witnesses everything on so many different scales for us individually and for our cities as a whole. Yeah, and before I end, I just want to shout out Austin Llewellyn, who I collaborated with, who's an amazing cellist and was there in the opening night. And also Moon Papas, who were an outstanding fabrication team. And you can see Austin and I performing together on the opening night, with me dancing, literally being moved by the content of people's prayers up the stairs. So thank you.
That's gorgeous. Thank you so much, Indira. Hi.
Peti washte, Suzanne Kite Pikishto, Oglala Hamacha, Chante washte na peti usable. My relatives, I shake your hands with a happy heart. My name is Suzanne Kite, or Taki Apiki Gluni Hawi. My piece in this exhibition is a very, very COVID era piece. And I think it was commissioned by Q during that time as under the theme of lullaby. And actually during the pandemic, I worked a lot before. I was working a lot before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I seemed to work constantly. The amount of requests to make films and videos and do online. This is one of the first online things I've done in a long time, as we've kind of shifted away from Zoom a lot, back to the request to constantly fly everywhere. But at the time I was, making a lot of work and sound art, and through video. And I, like most of my work, I always want to figure out how it can benefit not just me, but my relatives. And so for this piece, I didn't want to do anything besides what I was always doing every day, which was talking to my relatives on the phone, which I pretty much did day in and day out. And this piece, Hokshi Kilo Wampi, which means they sing it's kind of like the plural of they are singing a lullaby. I called my cousin, actually technically he's my uncle, but my cousin, and then he's my traditional brother too, Corey Stover. And Corey and I have a super close relationship, and I really rely on him to help me with, cultural knowledge and to teach me things that I didn't get a chance to learn as a child. So I decided to, share the project with him and asked him if he would teach me a lullaby over the phone. And when I was also doing another project with him simultaneously, where I would call him on the phone and we would talk, and we would decorate cakes together and talk about funerary cakes that we use on our reservation. They're not very popular in North America, but our tribe does a lot of funerary cakes. So I was really thinking about that practice of calling and talking on the phone. And so in this video work, it's very long, actually. I'm surprised that you wanted to curate it because I find it very long. And we just are talking in and around the things that were really concerning us at the moment. These phone calls are full of like gossip and family gossip and politics. Yeah, that's Corey. And neither of us are excellent singers, but I think the act of it's funny because the question of like what changes over since then, it's the big difference is I convinced Corey to move in with me and move out to New York where I live. Um, so I could continue these conversations more constantly. Yeah, I think that's what's really important to me. The backgrounds of them are films that I was making during, I was living in LA for part of the pandemic, and I was on the east side, and it was very dangerous in my neighborhood. There was a lot of gang activity. A lot of people were spending a lot of time outside, but I couldn't really walk around outside my house. Um, and so instead of staying home all the time, I would go protest. And I made a lot of films, mostly about. There's a project I did about helicopter surveillance in Los Angeles, which then was taken up by Stop LAPD Spying and taken up by the UCLA Carceral Justice Lab. But anyway, the films in the background are kind of like the lullaby is my focus within my internal world, and then like the videos around it are the external pressures of like extreme grief and missing my family. So yeah, I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kite. Jarod?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be in conversation with everyone. This work here is from a commission initially from Aperture, and it's about this. It was started from a prompt that looked at this idea of what tomorrow looks like. And I wanted to create a project that had this theme or this history of my mom, which is her being the fiance of Vincent Chin, who was a Chinese American draftsman that was murdered in 1982. But there was always this tension between wanting to do this project because of my mom's privacy, and want to not be a part of that, or not to be visualized within that history. And for me, I wanted to respect that privacy, but also find a strategy in how to obscure my mom in all of these photographs. And by asking her if it was okay to make pictures, but without her identity being in every photograph, she agreed to this feeling, or this way of working of being hidden, because I think ultimately it was almost this game that we played together of how many times can Jarod actually like make an interesting photograph of me by hiding my face. So this project started in that way, and it ultimately evolved into a project that looked at trying to visualize something that was not visualizing something that could not be seen through myself or the camera. And I think that was an introduction into how my practice has evolved since then. Instead of looking at my mom's own interiority, it's now about my own visualizing something that I cannot see as a Chinese American living in America, but also my disconnections with my mom's generation, my mom's history, my own self as an artist, working in these spaces. And yeah, I mean, that's the introduction of this project helped me shift into different ways of working with photography and other materials. Like I've been using a lot of archival images that I've been finding on eBay of other Asian American families, introducing self-portraiture as a way to reclaim objects of history, and also as a way to think about my own memories, as a strategy to to create a foundation for photographs that that I have, I guess, in my mind that I want to create. Yeah, so this project really helped me shift focus in the ways I work.
It's interesting how many of you are working with a kind of fullness of the unseen, exerting a certain pressure that's quite palpable. Jamel, thank you so much, Jarod. Jamel?
Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm Jamel Robinson. It's great to be here. And thank you all for, giving us your time. A little about this piece. I walked the longest mile to get to nowhere. Still, I made it during a stay. I had a 4-month residency in the Berkshires, which is an area of Massachusetts. And during my 4 months there, I spent a lot of time making various bodies of work, but I concentrated on assemblage, which you see here. And I'm in my work in assemblage is always speaking to the grief that surrounds the Black experience in America. So historically through present day. And I think, maybe to answer the question about how my work changed in the time of the pandemic, I think after the at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a exhibition of abstract paintings that didn't get to open until much later in the pandemic. And the next series of exhibitions I had were kind of at the institution level. So I had my first museum show. And at that point, I made a decision to use my platform for activism and to use works where the materials would cause you to ask questions. So you see military boots in this piece. You see a chain link. There's a chair. What you can't really see is that on the chair, there are nails. There's rice with glass embedded. There's ropes and there's pennies. All materials where if you saw them in person, or hopefully even when you look at them in a photo, you want to know why I use them. And, there's an explanation that's historical surrounding all of the materials. So example, the rice is referencing the rice trades as opposed to speaking about what's commonly referred to, which is the cotton trade. So I'm using a newer material to have the same conversation. Or when I'm using materials like pennies, I'm always speaking to the notion of being overlooked, discarded. And, as a Black man in America, I always begin with these conversations, but my work isn't limited to just my experience. It's mostly the umbrella idea is about marginalization. And so anyone who feels marginalized in a way can relate to some aspect of my work, hopefully. And the end result of these conversations is that, we activate some road to change. So if you didn't know about it, whenever my work is presented in public spaces, you can never deny the truth of history. And in that, my hope is always that we kind of gather a mindset of change. How can we work towards this? And I think as artists, I don't know if I so much believe that we have this quote unquote responsibility, because I just make the work that I want to make. If the work that I want to make speaks to something of the time, that's what I'm going to do. But, I think that as artists, our call is to make things so people can have experiences. And one of the great experiences of coming out of the pandemic was being able to get back to seeing art. Like, I live here in New York, so it was like for me to go, even to see my own exhibition when it opened was pretty amazing, and to see other people coming to see artwork, and then to have that experience kind of like spread out throughout the city and throughout the world was an incredible thing. I also, assemblage was one of the practices that I really expanded on in the time of the pandemic. But, since that time, I also taught myself for a short time, for like a month. I was teaching myself how to play the piano, and then I began to take a lesson. And so since the pandemic to present day, I have incorporated composition and songwriting and into my work, which currently, and also filmmaking. That was another, once we got out of the pandemic and we could move around, I took a trip with my brother, who's my studio director, but also my collaborator, and we began making films. And so, that was another extension of creativity that allowed me respite even in the making. It's like I didn't have to paint. I didn't have to work on assemblage. I could also compose. I'm a writer my entire life, so I could compose, write songs, and then we bought a camera and began making these films. One of which now is I have a solo exhibition at the Sugar Hill Museum in Harlem. And so that exhibition embodies assemblage, abstract painting, and also a film. And yeah, without spinning too much in a direction, for me, making is the most important thing. It's the way that I get from circumstance to breakthrough. It's like I have to make something. And I think that, in the world we live in today, it's like make something, and sometimes that thing to be made is simply like a difference, whether it's in this moment, like being able to share my thoughts with all of you and to also hear your thoughts. It's about, making connections and making a difference. So thanks.
Thank you, Jamel. Joe?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for attending. My piece, the piece that I'm showing in the exhibition is a piece called Half Blue. It was made actually before the pandemic. It's from 2019. And yeah, it's more or less a mixtape. It's a sound piece. But it's shown through the scope of this police bar, a bar, with the speaker in front of it and kind of subtitles for accessibility that are both kind of denoting what's heard, translation of what's heard, but also subtext to some of the sounds that you hear through the sound piece as well. And it's a very personal piece that kind of tries to address the murder of my cousin, Khalid Jabbar, who was killed in 2016, a hate crime in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was a very, I guess there was a lot of, it was a very sensationalized murder because of the outrageous circumstances that led to. He was murdered by his neighbor. But police were also complicit in how it happened, and it had a lot of news, had international news coverage because of that. And one of the things that was triggered for me was the fact that a lot of these sensationalized headlines, this kind of reductive news cycle, focus on portraits that I had taken of Khalid that were used without my permission, portraits that were never intended to be used in this way. And so the sound piece kind of starts with reflecting on that experience and then kind of thinking about the systemic conditions that kind of led to his murder through hate crimes. And this piece has, although it was made before the pandemic, it was his murder was in 2016. So the run up to the elections, Trump was, as he is, being very basically, spewing his hate like he does. And that absolutely contributed to the conditions that kind of led to the hate crimes that caused the tragedy. And since, even throughout the pandemic and up until now, this has only continued to resonate, the kind of systemic conditions that led to this. And so it's something that I continue to kind of work on and work with and kind of research. Like, for instance, one aspect after the fact of his murder, although it was a hate crime, it got me looking into hate crimes specifically. And one of the major things that came out of COVID-19 was in relation to hate crimes, was the 2022 COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And so just to give you some context before that, Oglala's death was tried as a hate crime, was actually not reported as a hate crime in the national database. And then 1 year after his death, on the day, Heather Heyer was an activist who was murdered by a white supremacist in Charlottesville, in Oklahoma. And her death was also not counted. And so that was so there was an activist, Maya Berry, who was looking into both of these cases, and they created a hate crime bill that was meant to kind of address the removal of the absence of this kind of accountability, the hate crime data that wasn't being accounted for. They introduced a bill that was called the Jarod, and it wasn't until 2022 that it was folded into this larger bill, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, because of all the hate crimes that were happening in relation to Asian American hate, and that aspect related to was finally able to get passed. But even up until today, like what's happening with genocide, there's another piece that I did over the summer that was shown at the Brooklyn Public Library that focuses on a children's library, social justice children's library that was created in Khalid's name. It's related to, just kind of like thinking about how to address this hate specifically. And for one of the final closing public programs, we invited Maya Berry to come and speak to us. This was the end of September. And I don't know if you guys remember, but there was also a judiciary hearing literally the day before our public event was. We had, and Senator Kennedy, there was a big kind of sensationalized thing where Senator Kennedy basically was completely was supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, but she completely rejected it. And it just proves to me just how relevant and how much more we have to do, how explicit we have to be, and how much more we have to kind of address these issues head on. And so this project is part of a kind of a bigger project around all this.
Thank you so much, Joe. And Carmen?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Sorry, just took a bite of something spicy. Thank you so much for hosting this. And Jill, I really appreciate your introduction. My ancestors come from the same corner of the world and fled under the same conditions. So I really appreciate you giving voice to that. The project that I'm going to be sharing today that's in the exhibition, it has a long, wordy title. It's called Why Are These Our Only Alternatives? And What Kind of Struggle Will Move Us Beyond Them? Which some of you may recognize as the last line from Silvia Federici's a very well-known text or manifesto called Wages Against Housework. Excuse me, called, is that what the text is called, from 1974? That's certainly what the group is called. So I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about sort of my way in relative to this larger question. When the pandemic hit in early 2020, I was teaching full time at my job here at Ohio State University, and I was also the mother to two children who were then 2 and 3 years old. So this is sort of a familiar story at this point. I was completely underwater. And I've always really been interested in engaging with and centering matters of, as already has been spoken of so eloquently, of really like radical interdependency and of mutual aid in my art and in my feminism. And the situation that I found myself in 2020 only sort of like stoked those flames and sort of augmented that desire. So even before the show, I was invited to be in a show in Mexico City at MUAC, which is on the UNAM campus, that was on sort of, most broadly put, what we used to call reproductive labor is so often now called social reproduction. At one point, the show was called something about like Stockholm syndrome, something and something, sort of how we become like inculcated into these, systems that, and to participate in these systems that oppress us. And for that show, I made this work that I ended up, talking, with the team at Casid about bringing over a sort of slightly smaller version of, if you can believe it, because it's already huge. And I'm going to try to describe this very quickly. I got in touch with Silvia Federici, who many people are probably familiar with, Marxist radical feminist philosopher and activist, and the co-founder in 1970 of Wages for Housework. Sorry, that title of the essay that I couldn't remember is Wages Against Housework. And for those of you who don't know, Wages for Housework is an international grassroots network that campaigns, it's still active, that campaigns for the recognition and remuneration of care work, like all caring work inside the home and outside the home. And it was co-founded, as I mentioned, by Silvia Federici, along with Selma James, Maria Della Costa, and Bridget Gaultier. And I was really sort of interested in this proposition, which seems so radical, but of course, is the least radical thing in the world, right? Like the New York Times has reported that, I think this is from 2022, the monetary value of care work done just by women in the United States is 10.8 trillion with a T annually. This is fucking nuts when you really think about it. I mean, that's 3 times the size of the entire world's tech industry, of the entire world. And that averages to about 4.5 hours a day on average, just for women, sort of performing the second shift. And so I was sort of thinking about the space between 1970 and 2020 and how it was that this had become even sort of more radical than it, and sort of outlandish a proposition than it was in 1970. And so I reached out to Sylvia. Like I said, her papers were in the process of being transferred over to Brown University, were not yet public. Through a series of events that I don't have time to get into here, I had access to them. I printed them all out and I didn't know what to do with them. I left them all around my house, just sort of like hoping that something would hit my studios at home. And at one point, one of my children drew on them in this sort of act, this momentary act of kind of a hopeful, radical, spontaneous praxis, really. Like it was sort of the sort of real and true merging in actual time of like the conditions, right, that they're campaigning for, and the sort of at that point really oppressive conditions of the home, but I think with like triangulated with another variable, which is imagination, like the imagination of children, the imagination of artists, and the imagination of activists, all of whom have the capacity and potential to build worlds, right? To like quite literally imagine something, which I think is the feminist imperative, to imagine something that does not yet exist, the conditions, that could be. And so that was sort of the basis upon which 800 of these sheets were made, and at the end, friends contributed their kids' artwork. And Alyssa Smith, who is an artist who was on here earlier but had to leave, who is a community art worker here in Columbus and a mother, printed these all for me. Atop my children's artwork at the Columbus Printed Art Center. So like there was a lot of solidarity in the making. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to leave it there for the purposes of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I also want to mark how many of us have been working collaboratively in reimagining kin relations in all kinds of ways in our work. It's a really striking thread. James?
Hi, hello from South Africa, and I apologize for the quality of my voice. I've got something that's flu-like. I hope it's not COVID, but I hope you can hear me all right. The artwork I'm sharing is called Prayer. It started in the year 2000, and the version exhibited in Houston is the 12th iteration. It is a city-specific artwork, so it is remade or refreshed in each city that it is shown in. Basically, it consists of audio recordings of prayer and vocal worship recorded from all the different religions and spiritual affinities in the host city, in this case, Houston. The recordings are not altered in any way, or they're not edited in any way, and I use every single recording made in the process. And the recordings are broadcast simultaneously from 12 floor-based speakers, which you can see on a red carpet in the slide. Could we actually have the next slide, please? Thanks, Maggie. The one before that. Or is that the second? This is good. What you will see is if someone had to walk on this carpet, you'd be able to hear, or you can see a picture of someone walking on the carpet. The audience can experience all the speakers playing at once with these different recordings, or by getting close to a speaker, they can hear the individual recording being played at that moment. So could we go back to that video, the cell phone footage, and you'll get an approximation of what it is like moving from speaker to speaker.
We become to others in need. We give thanks and remember that we are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone.
Thanks. I think for purposes of time, let's take that. Thank you very much. So prayer, I work with anyone who responds to the invitation, and often get several hundred recordings that make up the artwork. Prayer started in 2000, and it connects to my experience living during apartheid and in the time after democracy in South Africa. Another inspiration, interestingly enough, was Carl Sagan's Golden Record, an object sent into space by the Voyager spaceship in, I think, 1977. So as to give an idea of what human life on Earth would be in case a higher intelligence would encounter it. And my reasoning was I was imagining that prayer could in some ways be a kind of a sending out of a message somewhere above, something focused, or something for someone to hear and hopefully understand and accept it. This Houston version, like I said, is the 12th version. What makes this version of prayer remarkable is that I was unable to visit Houston for the beginning of the production stage. I was stuck in Sweden, a little bit like during the pandemic when we were all stuck somewhere. And so in the production of prayer, I was very fortunate to work with the producers, Sumaya and Zeneb Hilal, and work with the composer, Anthony Almaderas, who would go out and do the recordings on my behalf. And so suddenly this artwork was enlarged with their assistance. And even though I was elsewhere, I was still focused on Houston. And perhaps briefly, so as to segue into the question that's been posed to us, these last 4 years and with these experiences of isolation and the different circumstances preventing us from traveling have promoted the possibility of working with other people. And this has made me really value my collaborations even more and suggest that these connections, very powerful things can happen between us. And I think of that often quoted Robert Frost line, only way out is through. And there's a very important second part of that quote, which is not quoted enough. So the full quote is, the only way out is through, the only good way through is together. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, James. We've been super generous with our translations of the 4-minute prompt, which I think has been really important because we've all had a lot to say. I was interested in the fact that review of the exhibition by Quintessa Matranga opens with the critic admitting looking back at the past 4 years is not necessarily something I'm ready to do. And I was really struck, Joey, about your initial response to the prompt of let's do something on 2020, too soon. But maybe it's something that we can and maybe must do, but do it together. Or I really loved your other phrase, Joey, of describing the very tight hang and assembly of the work in terms of huddled solidarity. And I was wondering, in this huddle together, I know that we are almost at 1:15, and we want to give our audience a chance to ask some questions. But as I love thinking about questions as dance floors, I'm wondering if there's something else about the term in the title, makeshift, right? I mean, its sort of most dominant meaning would be provisional, but I think you're all doing various experiments to make shifts in a situation that might seem like it has no room to move whatsoever, and even, shifting, for example, how we sense to then make shifts in how we make sense. And so I was wondering if there was anything about the necessity of looking back to move forward, and or the make shift that prompts anything. And again, I'm not after a particular answer. It's a very capacious dance floor. Anything come to mind? If not, we can also open things up to questions. Magley, do we have some questions from those joining us?
Yes. The first question is from an anonymous audience member who is asking what shifts or continuities in your practice have emerged as you navigate the aftermath of the pandemic and the sociopolitical climate.
I mean, it's a nice turn on the question that you were all asked, but now that you've heard each other, maybe some things rise up for you that you wish you had shared with us. And I know we emphasized what shifted for you, but I'm wondering what you are hoping might shift for us in our encounter with your work.
I'll take a crack at it. I think, kind of in response to both questions, like to make a shift. I think that since the pandemic overall, people have made shifts in the things they talk about publicly, where maybe platforms have been left silent. Now they have voices. I think that the shift in the artistic practice goes from, even considering like the works of my comrades here. It's like something that is that might begin personally, then shifts to something that can be extended communally, so that people can connect and relate and have these conversations. I also think, just playing on the word of like making shifts like in perspective and what is prioritized within the work itself, or from the curatorial standpoint of what it is that is being presented to the public and why, just like shifting to opportunities where people can have dialogue, whether it's about uncomfortable things, whether the general population views something one way and you view it a different way, like shifting to a position of like standing for what you believe in specifically, and then also allowing people, for me at least, allowing people to have this space to view things completely different from me, where, because I believe that that's the only place where change can actually happen. It means like we don't vote the same way, we don't pray the same way, and yet we can still find some common ground to make a change. So, just constantly shifting forward, I think, to make shifts forward. And then just my closing thought is like, for me, it's pretty incredible to be in conversation in two different spaces at the same time. I just, for our curators, what an incredible job of making something cohesive that spans across two institutions in two different places to bring together one common goal. And so, just it's an honor to be a part of this discussion and that discussion and all of them. So.
Thanks so much, Jamel. James?
That was really great. Thank you very much. Because I'm curious about the idea of being in two places at once, because that's something that we had to embrace, I suppose, during the pandemic, and the way social media just became everywhere. And one could be in a room looking after, well, in my case, my stepkids or something, and if I was on my phone, I was elsewhere, and we were having to try and teleport and be elsewhere. And that I'm very inspired by this idea of this exhibition in two places, and how we can think about how we've had to split ourselves or try and invest ourselves in other parts of the world at any given time, even though geographically we were, for want of another word, stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
I didn't hear you called on, sorry. I'm thinking about that question sort of relative also to what's been said. I don't know if this will be a popular feeling, but I was sort of affected by this moment in a way that I didn't anticipate, and that I actually sort of became more ambivalent about art making as a way forward and through. And, asking myself, for instance, in the case of this work, like, what does it mean and do to make an artwork that is about mutual aid, in lieu of, let's say, like working at my mutual, sort of aid space, a mile away from where I live. Those aren't exclusive categories, but sort of I know this is something that we all wrestle with. So I sort of turn towards action and like away from symbols in a way that I think I haven't before as decisively. There's no value judgment in that, sort of just wrestling with it for myself. And I also became sort of much more interested in the global. In my case, that would be like, like global feminism and a kind of global anti-capitalist feminist movements. And I think that there was like so much interesting work being done there over the pandemic, and certainly where my work, because my work was commissioned for a show in Mexico, it was contextualized by so many feminist artists from Central America and South America, and so it kind of blew open a new world for me. So I sort of continue along both of those trajectories.
Well, a different sense of being in more than one place necessarily. And that can also be ambivalent in the sense of really fraught. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Joey.
Similarly to Carmen, I found myself in the last few years while I entered back into working within an institution, a kind of diminishing interest in what contemporary art or visual art does. So I think it's maybe a kind of professional threshold that I've reached. And then working on the exhibition, finally seeing the works in one space transformed me and contradicted everything I thought it would feel like. It became this kind of space of convening that I feel only is possible in the space of art. It was a wonderful experience to be with all of your works before the public was there. And it was quite special. And I really value that a lot. And thank you to your work. And so in a way, I think I was right to go forward with it, with the project, with the prompt of taking on the year 2020. And of course, the election, the circadian nature of social movements and election cycles came unexpectedly for many of us into a different reality. So the exhibition itself, it's gaining another kind of resonance. We've heard people talk about the unresolved COVID griefs. So it's just will be interesting to hear more about how people receive and encounter your works in the months to come.
I'll just follow up, Joey, to share that kind of similar apprehension of whether it's the right time, can we really hold all of these works together in this space, and what does that mean, is similarly shared by our audiences and even kind of our docent team here at the museum. For the first time, when we were going through the tour, we had several who just started to weep and cry, and whatever was felt, whatever was being brought up over the last 4 years of memory and what we thought we forgot, or oh my God, that I remember when we were lining up to enter grocery stores, all sorts of different things that kind of sprung up quite quickly. And it's really altered a sense of how we hold space, even in the museum. We have guards who are regularly talking to visitors about, oh yeah, tell me about, what just came up for you, or, like if you need a minute to process, here's how we can guide you to just taking a bit of space for yourself. And I love that kind of sense of slowness that has now entered into what can feel like, a university, a museum as a machine at times. And so I look forward to even, we're at the precipice of finals week, and we have a lovely prayer space that I think students are finding some respite in, or even a fountain to place their hopes, as Indira's described. So I welcome all of these shifts and fears and collective hopes all at the same time.
Well, and since we feel all those things often at the same time, it's so crucial to have spaces that can acknowledge and offer, yeah, handholds for navigating what can also be really overwhelming. I know in my own work, thinking about melancholy as a really important medium and resource. So grief not as something that holds us back, but as a really key aspect of our power has been really important. But of course, we're made to fear it. I know that we are very close to time. We are going to quite ritually, I know, end with prayer, but I wonder if was there another question that we would have a moment to consider before we?
Yes, we have a question from Chloe. I'll let Chloe unmute and ask.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this conversation. I was really struck in the press release for the exhibition about this idea of recollection as a protest against forgetting. It made me think a lot about technology and how pointed our gazes are at any given moment in contemporary life. And so many of you are engaging with the past in these really meaningful ways that decentralize the focus of a gaze and like consider how something can connect in a really beautiful way to the present and refocus our energy and our time towards this like sense of renewal. And I wonder how you think about that, and if you how you think about memory in your practices, and you know, both as a living thing that's iterative and that you're engaging with because you each are in different ways, but also as something that we're always sort of contending with as well and negotiating in contemporary life. Just a small question.
All right, I'll bob in. I think you know, for me, memory is extremely important, and when I'm given an opportunity, like I've been saying, like to put my work in a public space, and the choice between what kind of stories I want to tell via the material. So, you know, if it's abstract painting. Currently, I have a show. It has works that were made using boxing gloves, and it tells a story that's personal and private. But you know, the marks that are made are expressing breakthrough. And then directly on the other side of the same show, I have chains, rope, pennies, nails, rice. You know, and anytime I'm using rope in a work, I'm directly speaking about lynching because I want people never to forget that that occurred. Or I want to use rice because I want people never to forget. You know, we live in a time where something is the hot topic of the moment, and then we have another thing, and then we can tend to forget. And what I love about, you know, all of the artists' works is like there's a moment in there where it's like you can never forget. And I really love that institutions allow us the platform for the moment, or if they go into permanent situations where there's like a never forget, like that's the call. And it's not to like, because sometimes people might mistake this as like beating the dead horse and not moving forward. But for me, it's just about carrying the horse with me into the future, so that as I make strides, you know, like as people, we have breakthrough and we make strides, but those scars are always there. And I think they're beautiful as long as we continue to make strides forward. And you know, I again, like I really for Caddis to even have this peace of mind. It's like not an easy thing. It's not easy to transport. It's not easy to exhibit. It's not easy to like own in a collection. And this is the kind of support that artists need in order to continue these, to carry this torch that we do. And from the rest of the artists here, like so graciously, I'm just floored by what it is that we get to do. So.
Yeah, Jarod.
Yeah, I really love that question, Chloe, about memory. I think memory for me was a way to get my family comfortable being photographed because they're ultimately just very private. And I was thinking a lot about Marianne Hirsch's ideas of post-memory as a way to almost fantasize about the work that I make now, like using memory as a way to think about fantasy. Um, and you know, now with the work that I've been doing, that's really shifted from my family is that oftentimes I would ask collaborators to remember a certain event in their life, and it almost becomes, memory becomes this bridge between two different worlds that can create something a little bit more complicated than something that I solely would just fantasize by myself. So I really enjoy thinking about memory and the fragility of memory as a way to almost fantasize about something more complicated and more interesting.
Joe, thank you so much, Jarod. That was
I
really
can
beautiful.
just jump in.
Yeah. Please.
Okay, sorry. I would just add, just thinking about memory, but also in relation to grief, and the relationship between memory and grief, and the absence of what was but is no longer, and collective grief as well. And so much of what I've been trying to think about is, how to accept that, use that, be with it, be at peace with it, and it's become a big part of trying to cope with everything.
Thank you all so much for those answers. I'm going to pass it back over to Jill to introduce our closing reading, but I just want to thank you so much for this conversation, which has been an honor to listen to.
Well, I'm going to echo and amplify, and thank you all so much. And I know that it's hard to look back, but also such a buoying experience to get to do that with you, to remember in ways that can start to alter that experience, not least so that never again is never again for anyone. We are going to close with a auditory experience, a translation, a little bit of James Webb's site-specific sound installation, prayer, and this is taking the place of what has been a bit of a ritual for the Brooklyn Rail's new social environment to end with a poetry reading. And it seems fitting also that as you were recounting, Indira, prayer can be a trigger for some, not necessarily speak to all, and yet in this very cross-denominational translation of prayer, we can think about it as the ways that remembering is also interconnected with our hopes, dreams, and fantasies to bring forward some of the key terms that have emerged here.
Ashim Vahu Vishtem asti, ushta asti, ushta amai, yadashai, vahishta yashem. Give all you can, help all you can, happiness to him who befriends all men.
O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with thee know that they are therefore one with every other.
May our intention equally extend to every being and place, with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.
Almost feels like we ought to observe a moment of silence after that. Thank you, James. Well, and as we've been reminded, silence and empty space are not empty, but move us. Thank you all so much. It's been such a privilege to hold this space with you all. During the pandemic, my practice definitely shifted. I wasn't necessarily much of a hugger, but I kept finding myself doing this gesture every time I was in a Zoom room, this sort of arms empty space gesture. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much for such a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Indira, Erika, Kite, Jarod, Joe, Jamel, Joey, James, Carmen, and Jill. Thank you to Kyle and the teams at Third Eye and Caddis for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel, which you can also find this conversation in later. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. The donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Jed Morse, Christopher Lyon, Suzanne Rameljack, and Phyllis Tuckman on the event of David Smith, The Nature of Sculpture at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Virtual hug.
Thanks,
Virtual hugs.
Bye, everyone. That was amazing.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
This was amazing.
Thank you, you guys.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Phil.
you, Jill. Thank you.
Thank
Keep up the
you.
good work, okay?
You too.
Back at you. Yes, let's
Bye.
keep doing this.
Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.